In this week's Parshas Pinchas, there's a statement of Chazal well known to all of us, cited by Rashi, that is so deep in its meaning and so far-reaching in its historic significance. The Psukim in Pinchas tell us that following the Maisa of the Neshei Paran, we are told that Moshe Rabbeinu was instructed to take accounting, to take a census of the men of Klal Yisrael. And after the census is concluded, the Pasuk states unequivocally, Eile Pekudei Moshe ve'Elazar HaKohen. This is, in fact, the census that was recorded by Moshe and Elazar, the son of Aharon, Asher Pogdu es Bnei Yisrael ba'arvos Moav, taken within the plains of Moav, Yarden, Yericho, by the river opposite Yericho. And none of the people 20 years and older included in this census were those that were included in the census taken by Moshe and Aharon upon the departing from Eretz Mitzrayim. Why? Because all of those men, other than Kalev, Ben Yefuna, and Yeshua, Ben Nun, all of those men perished in the Midbar. Says the Apostle, "V'lo nosar mehem ish," and there remained not one man from that original counting, other than Kalev Ben Yefuna and Yeshua Ben Nun, who were the two of the 12 Meraglim who returned from Eretz Yisrael, and they were steadfast in the reporting of what was to be found there and the ability of Klal Yisrael to enter the land. Rashi here comments upon the fact that the wording of the pasuk is instead of saying there wasn't even one from the original counting other than Kalev Ben Yefuna and Yeshua Ben Nun, but rather says there was no man who was in the original counting and the ultimate counting. Why man? Says Rashi, because whereas the edict from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that every man above the age of 20 would perish in the desert, that Gzeira was never upon the women. Because they were so steadfastly loyal and so loving, so appreciative of the value of Eretz Yisrael. So whereas the men said, Nitna Rosh, we're going to perish, we'll die in an effort to try to capture the land. Let's go back to Egypt. The women were saying, what are you kidding? Give us a share in the land of Israel. The women appreciated the land, had such a love for it, whereas the men thought little of it. Really? Is that what we were told in the Seder of Shlach? Is that what occurred? Why, my recollection in the Seder of Shlach is that the Meraglim came back and returned to Klal Yisrael, and they said, indeed, Banu ala Aretz asher shalachtanu, we've come to the land, we scouted it out as per our instructions, and indeed it's overflowing with milk and honey, just as we were promised. And here are the fruits that we brought back. 8 men carrying the grapes, 1 the fig, 1 the pomegranate. Huge, huge. Look what God is going to grant us. It's every bit what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has promised. There's only one problem. The problem is, the people are so gigantic and the city so fortified will never be able to conquer it and enter the land. Because it's not simply that is so much, and they are so much stronger than we, but mimenu, says Rashi, kaviyachal klape mala amru, says the Gemara in Sota. They were saying, because God will never be able to be sufficiently strong and sufficiently able to enable us to enter the land and claim it as our own. So what do you mean that the women were spared the gzeira of dying in the desert for 40 years because they were machavavos ha'aretz? That's not what happened. The men said, it's fabulous land. We believe in it. We love it. We want to be there. But we'll never be able to do it because God isn't capable of doing it. Whereas the women obviously said, what are you talking about? The Rebbeinu Shalom promised it to us. God can do anything and everything. Of course, he will deliver on his promise. So why does it say Vanoshim Omros? Because The women were what? Mechavavos ha'aretz. They were so loving of the land. What's pshat? I suggest as follows. We've been suffering as a nation of Israel, certainly in Golus and even in Eretz Yisrael, from a very, very serious challenge that we've never come up with an appropriate answer for, namely the fact that there are not sufficient numbers of young men to marry young women within Klal Yisrael, within the sprung communities of Klal Yisrael. And behold, Nebuch, for which understandably every parent of such a young woman tears out his and her hair because they're without shidduchim. The numbers aren't in sync. Well, let me ask you a question. During those 40 years in the Midbar, when the men were dying out, each and every Erev Tisha B'Av, Rashi and Tainus cites a brisa from the Rishalmi that says every Erev Tisha B'Av the men were told to dig graves for themselves, and they went into the grave. And then in the morning they heard a basko come out and said, Yibadu achayim meramesim, that those who were yet alive and who didn't die at night exit from the graves for at least another year. 600,000 men above the age of 20 left Mitzrayim. And other than Kaleb ben Yefuneh and Yeshua ben Nun, they died out. So let me ask you, number one, doesn't that mean that so many women within Klal Yisrael never had shidduchim in those 40 years? One can answer, maybe the men took more than one wife. But so many didn't have shidduchim. And they knew they wouldn't have shidduchim because the men would continue dying out. And those who were fortunate enough to be married, they kept on becoming widows as the years moved on. And yet, even they knew that the reason for there not being enough shidduchim and then the reason for them becoming widows was because of the fact that the men had sinned by the return of the Meraglim, questioning the ability of God to take them into the land. And therefore they didn't merit entrance. And the women were almonos, or the women weren't married. And as they marched to the land of Israel, it would have been more than natural and more than understandable for them to develop perhaps even a distaste for the destiny of that journey. Because look what it means, look what it's done to me. And nonetheless, Mechavavos ha'aretz, ten lano, tenu lano achuza. Give us our portion in the land. As they marched tall, with a chibas ha'aretz, a love and an endearment that was forever unquestioned, forever unshakable, so stoic in nature, such fortitude, such belief, such promise to the obedience of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of his decrees, of his commands, of his promises. Eshes Chayomi Yimsa, we commonly translate as, who is the woman of valor, who can be found? The women of the Dar Midbar, why they were the Neshei Chayo. They were women of valor. They were the Machavavos Tzio. They were the Machavavos Eseret Yisrael. And is it not so? Is it not every bit as true that nowadays that endless numbers of Jewish mothers who live in Israel with all of its blessings and all of its challenges, and those who have sons in the army, husbands in the army, brothers in the army, fathers in the army, and they stay put, and they don't leave Eretz Yisrael, and they are forever promised to its success and to its growth, even to the sacrifice of husbands and brothers and fathers and sons. Are they not the Mechavavos Esaretz supreme? Lo nosar ish. But the women, lo nigzer gzera al hanoshim, because they were the women of valor. They were the women who had an endless, endless love for Eretz Yisrael. Have a wonderful Shabbos.